The lobby of the Argent was a world under glass. Polished marble floors reflected the recessed lighting in soft, golden pools, and the air always smelled faintly of lemon oil and money. From my post behind the mahogany lectern, I was the quiet keeper of this sterile terrarium, a fixed point around which the lives of the residents revolved. My name is Leo, and for 40 hours a week, I wore a uniform that was worth more than my entire wardrobe: navy wool, brass buttons, and a hat that always felt a half size too small. My own life was a small, rented room 4 train stops away, a place of quiet routines and carefully managed expenses. Here, I was an observer, a ghost in a smart suit, my existence defined by holding doors, accepting packages, and offering a polite, unobtrusive nod. Most residents became blurs of expensive perfume and rustling shopping bags. But he was different. Mr. Arthur Vance was not a resident. He visited twice a week, always on Tuesdays and Thursdays, arriving precisely at 7 in the evening to see Mr. Albright in the penthouse. He was older, maybe early 50s, with silver at his temples that looked deliberate, like fine brushstrokes. He moved with a stillness that commanded space without demanding it. Where others rushed, he strolled. Where others spoke loudly into their phones, he was silent, his gaze taking in the lobby with a calm, appraising quality. I had noticed him from the first day he appeared. It was the way he carried himself, a kind of settled gravity that made the air around him feel more solid. He wore charcoal gray suits that fit his broad shoulders perfectly and carried a leather briefcase that looked soft from years of use. He never seemed to be in a hurry, and he always met my eyes when I greeted him. It was not the dismissive glance I got from most people, but a direct, thoughtful look. A brief acknowledgement that I was a person standing there. For months, our interactions were limited to that. A quiet, "Good evening, Mr. Vance," from me. A low, warm "good evening" in return, sometimes with my name attached, which always sent a strange jolt through my chest. Hearing my own name from his lips felt like being seen in a place where I was paid to be invisible. I found myself looking forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays, the steady rhythm of his arrival a small, anchoring point in my long, repetitive shifts. I would watch the clock, and a quiet tension would build in my shoulders as 7 o'clock approached. It was a foolish, secret thing, this anticipation, a small crack in the disciplined wall of my professional demeanor. In my small apartment, a single silver cufflink sat in a chipped ceramic bowl on my dresser. It had fallen from his coat one evening as he'd shrugged it off near my desk. I had picked it up, intending to return it immediately, but he had already stepped into the elevator. The doors had slid shut on his calm, retreating back. I told myself I would give it to him the next time, but the next time came, and I found myself unable to. The cufflink was smooth, heavy, and unadorned except for a small, etched V. It felt like a stolen secret, a tangible piece of his world that I could hold in my own. It was a reminder of the vast distance between the lobby of the Argent and my life. Then came the rain. It started in the afternoon, a fine mist that turned the city gray and slick. By evening, it was a downpour, the kind that beat against the plate glass windows of the lobby like a frantic drum. The streetlights outside blurred into watercolor streaks. It was a Tuesday, and I knew he would be coming. I watched the revolving door, my posture a little straighter than usual. The warmth of the lobby felt like a fortress against the storm outside. At 7 o'clock, precisely, a black car pulled up to the curb. The driver, a man I recognized, hurried around to open the passenger door with a large black umbrella. Mr. Vance stepped out, shielded from the worst of the rain. He handed the driver a few bills and then walked toward the entrance, his shoulders set against the wind. He came through the revolving door, bringing with him the clean, cold scent of the storm. Water beaded on the shoulders of his dark overcoat. He paused at my lectern, which was unusual. Normally, he would nod and proceed directly to the elevators. "Quite a storm, Leo," he said. His voice was that same low, calm timbre, but it seemed to hold a different quality in the rain-muted quiet of the lobby. It was warmer, closer. "It certainly is, Mr. Vance." I managed, my own voice sounding thinner than I would have liked. My hands felt suddenly large and clumsy resting on the polished wood of the lectern. He was holding a different umbrella now, not the driver's. This one was old-fashioned and elegant, with a dark, carved wooden handle that looked like the head of a bird. He furled it neatly, the movement economical and precise, and placed it in the brass stand near my desk. A small puddle immediately began to form at its base. He gave me another one of those direct looks, a flicker of something in his gray eyes that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was something more like shared understanding, as if he knew what it was like to be standing inside, watching the weather rage. Then he turned and walked to the elevator, his footsteps silent on the marble. I watched him go, the image of his steady gaze imprinted behind my eyes. I spent the next few hours in a state of heightened awareness. The routine of my job continued, announcing guests, signing for deliveries, but my mind kept returning to that brief, two-sentence exchange. The way he had said my name. The unexpected pause at my desk. It was nothing, I told myself. Just a man making small talk about the weather. But it felt like more. It felt like a change in the atmosphere, a subtle shift in the gravitational pull between us. His visit with Mr. Albright was longer than usual. 10 o'clock came and went. The lobby emptied out, the sounds of the city outside muffled by the rain and the thick glass. It was just me, the hushed hum of the building's climate control, and the steady drumming of the rain. And the umbrella. It stood in the brass holder, a silent, solitary sentinel. I found my eyes drawn to it again and again. The handle was worn smooth in places, the wood darkened with age and use. It was an object of quality, something made to last. It spoke of a life of permanence and stability that felt a million miles away from my own. At nearly 11, the elevator chimed its soft, melodic arrival. The doors slid open, and Mr. Vance stepped out. He looked tired. There were faint lines around his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. He walked toward the main doors, his overcoat unbuttoned. He nodded at me as he passed, a distracted, weary gesture. "Good night, Leo. Good night, Mr. Vance," I replied, my voice soft in the cavernous quiet. He pushed through the revolving door and was gone, stepping into the waiting black car that had reappeared at the curb as if by magic. I watched until the red taillights disappeared into the rain-swept darkness of the street. And then I saw it. Or rather, I saw the absence of it. The umbrella was still there, standing sentinel in its brass pot, a forgotten piece of his world left behind in mine. My heart gave a sudden, hard thump against my ribs. He had forgotten it. A simple mistake on a long, tiring night. My job description was clear in these situations. Log the item, store it in the building's lost and found, and return it to the owner upon their next visit. That was the professional, correct thing to do. It was what I should have done. But as I looked at the umbrella, at its handsome, solid presence, another thought took root. A reckless, impulsive idea. I could return it to him. Personally. I knew the name of his company from a stray piece of mail I had once handled for Mr. Albright, Vance Capital. It was in a tower in Midtown, not impossibly far. I could take it to him tomorrow on my lunch break. The thought was terrifying. It was a breach of protocol, a blurring of the rigid lines that defined my job and my life. It was an excuse to see him outside the carefully delineated space of the lobby, to have a reason to speak to him that was not prescribed by my uniform. I reached out, and my fingers brushed against the carved wooden handle. The wood was cool and smooth, like a worry stone. This was my catalyst. This simple, forgotten object was an invitation, a chance to step out of the background for just a moment. The cufflink in the bowl at home was a secret I kept. This umbrella felt different. It felt like an opportunity one had to take. The next day, the city was washed clean, the sky a pale, fragile blue. The air smelled of wet pavement and new beginnings. I spent the morning shift in a state of nervous agitation, the umbrella tucked away safely in the staff closet behind my lectern. Every time the elevator chimed, I expected him to appear, to ask for it, and for my chance to be gone. But he did not come. My lunch break arrived at 1 o'clock. My hands were trembling slightly as I retrieved the umbrella. It felt heavier now, weighted with my own foolish hopes. Holding it felt like carrying a piece of contraband. I walked the 12 blocks to Vance Capital, my doorman's shoes, usually so comfortable, pinching my feet. The building was a sleek, modern tower of glass and steel, a stark contrast to the old-world elegance of the Argent. The lobby was vast and impersonal, filled with the hurried footsteps and anxious energy of high finance. I felt utterly out of place, a man in a service uniform standing in a temple of power. I approached the intimidating security desk, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. "I'm here to see Mr. Arthur Vance," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I have something for him." The woman behind the desk, chic and severe, looked me up and down, her expression a mixture of confusion and disdain. "Does he know you?" "No," I admitted, feeling a hot flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. "I'm the doorman from the Argent. He left this in our lobby last night." I held up the umbrella. Her expression softened fractionally. She picked up a phone, spoke into it in a low, efficient murmur, and then hung up. "His assistant will be down to collect it." She dismissed me with a wave of her hand, already turning her attention to a ringing phone. I was to be handled by proxy, just as I'd feared. I felt a sharp sting of disappointment. Of course, why would a man like Arthur Vance come down to the lobby to see a doorman? I stood to the side, feeling small and foolish, waiting to hand over the umbrella and retreat back to my own world. I was just about to give up, to leave the umbrella with the dismissive receptionist and flee, when a voice from behind me said, "Leo?" I turned. It was him. He was standing there, not 10 feet away, having come from a different bank of elevators. He was not wearing a suit jacket, just a crisp white shirt and dark trousers held up by suspenders. He looked younger without the armor of his suit, more approachable. And he had used my name. "Mr. Vance." I breathed, a wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy. He walked toward me, a small, curious smile on his face. "I was told someone from the Argent was here with my umbrella." I didn't expect them to send their best man. His eyes were warm, a soft gray that seemed to hold the light. "You didn't have to do this. I would have picked it up on my next visit. It was no trouble," I said, the words feeling inadequate. I held the umbrella out to him. I was on my break. His fingers brushed against mine as he took it. The touch was brief, accidental, but it sent a spark of warmth racing up my arm. He looked at the umbrella, then back at me. His gaze was steady, assessing, the same way he looked at the lobby, but this time it was focused entirely on me. I felt pinned by it, seen in a way that was both unnerving and deeply exhilarating. It was the weight of a gaze I was beginning to crave. "Thank you, Leo," he said, his voice low and sincere. "That was very thoughtful of you." He paused, a flicker of something crossing his face. Hesitation, perhaps. "I was just about to get some coffee. Would you let me buy you a cup, as a thank you?" The world seemed to stop for a second. The bustling lobby, the severe receptionist, the frantic energy of the city, it all faded away. There was only his question, hanging in the air between us. An offer that crossed the line from professional courtesy into something else, something personal. It was an open door. "I'd like that," I heard myself say, the words coming out before my fear could pull them back. A genuine smile transformed his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Good," he said. "There's a quiet place around the corner." He gestured for me to walk with him, and for the first time, I fell into step beside Arthur Vance, leaving the glass tower and the world I knew behind, if only for the length of a coffee break. The coffee shop was small and quiet, tucked away on a side street. It smelled of roasted beans and old books. We sat at a small table in the back, the dark wood a warm contrast to the cool marble of my usual world. He insisted on ordering for both of us, a simple black coffee for himself, and he asked me what I wanted with a genuine curiosity that disarmed me. I asked for the same. It felt safer, somehow. For the first few minutes, we sat in a comfortable silence. I watched him as he added a small amount of sugar to his coffee, his movements precise and unhurried. His hands were what I noticed most. They were large and capable, with clean, short fingernails. They were hands that signed important documents and commanded boardrooms, but they stirred his coffee with a gentle, deliberate grace. I wondered what it would feel like to have one of those hands rest on my arm. He caught me looking, and his mouth tilted up at the corner. "Is everything all right, Leo?" I felt my face heat up. "Yes, fine. Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Vance." "Arthur, please," he said softly. "When I'm not in your building, and you're not in your uniform, I think we can dispense with the formalities, Arthur." The name felt foreign on my tongue, too intimate. But I nodded. "Arthur," I repeated, testing the sound of it. It fit him. It was a solid, dependable name, like the man himself. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving my face. "So, tell me about yourself, Leo. How long have you been at the Argent?" His question was simple, but the interest in his eyes felt profound. It wasn't the polite, surface-level curiosity of the wealthy residents. It felt like he genuinely wanted to know. I found myself talking. I told him I had been there for 3 years. I told him I had moved to the city for college to study art history, a fact that felt both foolish and achingly distant now. I explained that I had taken the doorman job to pay off student loans and help with family expenses back home. I didn't mean to share so much, but he was an excellent listener. He never interrupted, just nodded occasionally, his expression thoughtful and engaged. Art history, he mused, taking a sip of his coffee. That seems a world away from the lobby of the Argent. It is, I admitted, a familiar pang of disappointment twisting in my gut. But a job is a job. It's steady is important, he agreed, his voice devoid of any judgment. There is a nobility in reliability. He said it so simply, with such conviction, that it made my chest ache. He saw my job not as a failure to achieve something else, but as something valuable in its own right. In that moment, I felt a wave of gratitude toward him that was so intense it almost scared me. We talked for the rest of my break. He asked me about the paintings I loved, and I found myself describing the quiet light in a Vermeer, the raw emotion in a Caravaggio. He listened with an intensity that made me feel like the most interesting person in the world. He, in turn, spoke a little about his work, not in terms of profits and losses, but in the abstract puzzles he enjoyed solving. He made venture capital sound less like a soulless machine and more like a complex, intricate game of strategy. All too soon, I had to leave. I need to get back, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I didn't want this to end. Of course, he said, standing up with me. He walked me to the door of the coffee shop. The afternoon sun was bright, and I had to squint as we stepped outside. Thank you again for the coffee. Arthur, saying his name felt more natural this time. The pleasure was all mine, he said. And then he did something that made my breath catch in my throat. He reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder. It was a light, friendly gesture, but his palm was warm through the fabric of my uniform jacket. The weight of it was grounding, a solid point of contact in a world that suddenly felt unsteady. And thank you for returning my umbrella, Leo. It was my father's. It means a great deal to me. The admission was so simple, so unexpectedly vulnerable, that I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded, my throat tight. He held my gaze for a moment longer, his thumb pressing ever so slightly into my shoulder before he let go. The absence of his touch was immediate, a sudden coolness on my skin. I'll see you tonight, he said, and it sounded less like a statement of fact and more like a promise. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, my heart racing and the phantom warmth of his hand still burning on my shoulder. That evening, my shift felt different. The lobby, usually a place of detached observation, was now charged with anticipation. I was no longer just watching him. We had shared something, a space outside of our prescribed roles. I replayed our conversation over and over in my head, dissecting every word, every look. I analyzed the way his eyes had crinkled when he smiled, the low timbre of his voice when he said my name. I was spiraling into a fantasy, I knew, building a palace of hope on the fragile foundation of a single cup of coffee. When 7 o'clock arrived, my hands were sweating. The black car pulled up, and Arthur stepped out. He was back in his full suit, the armor of his professional life restored. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might revert to our old routine, that the coffee shop had been a fleeting anomaly. But as he walked toward me, his eyes found mine across the lobby, and he gave me a small, private smile. It was a smile that said, I remember. That was real. Good evening, Leo, he said, his voice the same calm murmur, but now it held a new layer of warmth, a new resonance that only I could hear. Good evening, Arthur. I replied, the name slipping out easily. It felt right. A flicker of surprise, or perhaps pleasure, crossed his face before he composed it back into his usual neutral expression. He nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, and then proceeded to the elevator. But the shift had happened. The line had been crossed. We had a secret now, a shared 45 minutes in a quiet coffee shop that existed outside the polished world of the Argent. Over the next few weeks, our routine evolved. Our greetings became warmer, the eye contact longer. He would often pause at my desk for a moment, asking about my day or making a quiet observation about a book I was reading during a lull. He never stayed long, never did anything that would draw attention or seem inappropriate, but his brief pauses became the highlight of my shifts. He had a way of creating a small bubble of privacy around us, even in the middle of the busy lobby. I learned to read his micro-expressions. A slight tightening of his jaw meant he'd had a difficult day. A relaxed set to his shoulders meant a successful meeting. I became a scholar of Arthur Vance, my observations growing more detailed, more intimate. I noticed the way he always straightened his tie just before the elevator doors opened, a small, unconscious gesture of preparation. I noticed the faint scent of cedar and something clean, like fresh linen, that clung to his coat. One evening, he was leaving later than usual. A young, brash resident, Mr. Calloway, was berating one of the cleaning staff near the front desk over a perceived smudge on the brass door handle. Calloway was loud and condescending, his voice echoing in the nearly empty lobby. I was about to intervene, as was my duty, when Arthur stepped out of the elevator. He took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush over. He simply walked to my desk and stood beside me, his presence a sudden, solid wall of authority. He placed his soft leather briefcase on the lectern with a quiet thud. The sound was enough to make Calloway falter. "Is there a problem here?" Arthur asked, his voice low and even, but with an unmistakable edge of steel. He wasn't addressing Calloway directly, but the young man flinched as if he had. Calloway, flustered by the presence of a man who so clearly outranked him in the unspoken hierarchy of wealth and power, stammered something about standards and cleanliness. Arthur didn't even look at him. His gaze was fixed on the cleaner, a kind woman named Maria who was close to tears. "Maria does an excellent job," Arthur said, his voice still quiet but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "This building is always immaculate. Perhaps your standards are simply unreasonable." He then turned his cool, gray eyes on Calloway. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" It was a masterful dismissal. Calloway turned red, mumbled an apology, and practically fled the lobby. Arthur watched him go, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Maria and gave her a small, reassuring nod before picking up his briefcase. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the protector in him, the quiet strength he wielded so effortlessly. As he headed for the door, his hand brushed against mine on the lectern. It was not an accident. His fingers lingered for a fraction of a second, a deliberate, fleeting touch. It was a gesture of solidarity, of alliance. It said, "We are on the same side." The touch was electric, a jolt of connection that left my skin tingling long after he was gone. I stood there, my hand resting on the spot his had been, my world tilting on its axis. He had not just defended a member of the staff, he had stood with me. He had closed the distance between the penthouse visitor and the doorman, and in that small, silent gesture, had made us partners. The shared moment of the Calloway incident had solidified something between us, an unspoken understanding that ran deeper than our polite lobby conversations. The brief, intentional touches became more frequent. A light brush of his arm against mine as he passed, a hand that lingered for a moment too long when he handed me a dry-cleaning ticket. Each touch was a quiet question, and my stillness, my refusal to pull away, was the answer. We were communicating in a silent language of proximity and gentle contact, a language that felt more honest than words. I spent hours in my small apartment replaying these moments, my mind a catalog of his quiet gestures. I would trace the memory of his fingers against my skin, the faint warmth of his presence beside me. I was falling for him, deeply and irrevocably. It was a terrifying realization. He was from a different world, a different generation. The chasm between our lives was immense, a gaping void of wealth, status, and experience. My yearning felt like a dangerous indulgence, a fantasy that could only lead to heartbreak. And yet, I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop the way my heart leaped when his car pulled up, or the way I held my breath when he paused at my desk. He was becoming the center of my quiet world, the sun around which my lonely planet had begun to orbit. I started to wonder about his life outside of the Argent. Was there someone else? A wife, a partner? I had never seen him with anyone but business associates. He wore no ring. But the absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence. The thought of him belonging to someone else was a cold knot of dread in my stomach. One rainy Thursday evening, the city was brought to a standstill by a sudden power outage. The lights in the lobby flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging us into a disorienting darkness. The emergency lights kicked in a second later, casting the grand space in an eerie, dim orange glow. The elevators stopped. The electronic doors locked. We were trapped in our glass terrarium. And, as fate would have it, Arthur had just stepped out of the elevator seconds before the power failed. He was standing in the middle of the lobby, his silhouette a dark, solid shape against the emergency lighting. Several residents began to panic, their voices rising in anxious chatter. My own heart was pounding, but my training took over. I picked up the emergency phone, a direct line to building maintenance, and began the protocol. Arthur, however, was a picture of calm. He walked over to my desk, his movements as unhurried as ever. "Everything all right, Leo?" he asked, his voice a steady anchor in the growing chaos. "The backup generator for the elevators and main systems failed to engage," I reported, reading the information from the emergency panel. "Maintenance is working on it, but they're giving a 2-hour estimate." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. He looked around at the small crowd of flustered residents. "We should get some water for people. And find some flashlights." He wasn't giving an order. He was suggesting a plan, including me in it as an equal. For the next hour, we worked together. I knew where the emergency supplies were stored, and he helped me distribute water bottles and battery-powered lanterns. His calm authority was infectious, and the residents slowly settled down, their panic subsiding into grumbling inconvenience. We became a team, moving through the dimly lit lobby with a shared purpose. He spoke to an elderly woman, his voice gentle and reassuring, while I helped a young family find a comfortable place to sit. In a strange way, the blackout was a gift. It stripped away the context of our usual roles. He was not a wealthy visitor, and I was not a uniformed doorman. We were just two men, managing a small crisis together. The uniform I wore felt less like a costume and more like simple work clothes. The space between us, usually so defined by the lectern and the marble floors, had vanished. We stood shoulder to shoulder, our arms brushing as we handed out supplies, the easy camaraderie of a shared task binding us together. After everyone was settled, we found ourselves standing near the darkened front windows, looking out at the blacked-out city. The only light came from car headlights moving slowly down the street. The rain had started again, tracing silver paths down the glass. "You're good in a crisis," he said, his voice a low murmur beside me. "Part of the job," I replied, though my heart was fluttering at the compliment. "No," he said, turning to look at me in the dim light. "It's more than that. You have a stillness about you. You reassure people." I didn't know what to say. He saw me. He saw past the uniform and the rehearsed pleasantries and saw something in my character. It was the most profound compliment I had ever received. He was standing closer than he ever had before. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell that faint, clean scent of cedar. The air between us was thick with unspoken things. All the small touches, the lingering glances, the shared smiles, they all led to this moment, here in the dark. "Leo," he began, his voice softer now, more personal. He hesitated, as if weighing his next words carefully. "I worry, sometimes, that my stopping to talk to you puts you in a difficult position. With your job, with the residents." My breath hitched. He was not only aware of the power imbalance between us, he was actively concerned about my well-being within it. He was giving me an out, a chance to tell him to back off if his attention was unwelcome or dangerous for me professionally. This is it. This is the moment for honesty. My fear and my yearning were at war within me. Fear told me to play it safe, to reassure him with a polite, professional lie. But my heart, my desperate, lonely heart, urged me to take the risk. "It doesn't," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but clear in the quiet. I turned to face him fully, my shoulder brushing the lapel of his expensive suit. "Your stopping to talk to me is the best part of my day." The words hung in the air, a raw and honest confession. I had laid my cards on the table, my vulnerability a fragile offering in the dark. I watched his face, trying to read his expression in the faint orange light. He didn't pull away. He didn't laugh or look uncomfortable. Instead, his expression softened into something I could only describe as relief. He raised a hand, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to touch my face. But he stopped, his fingers hovering in the space between us before he let his hand drop back to his side. It was a gesture of immense restraint, a clear and deliberate respect for our public setting, even in the dark. "I'm glad," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Because it's the best part of mine, too." And then, just as the tension between us reached its peak, the lights flickered back on. The lobby was flooded with its usual golden brilliance, harsh and revealing after the intimacy of the dark. The residents cheered. The elevators chimed back to life. The spell was broken. But the truth of what we had said remained, a new, indelible fact in the world. We had both confessed, and neither of us had run. The aftermath of the blackout was a return to a strange, heightened version of our normal routine. The power was back, the residents dispersed, and I was once again behind my lectern, the uniform feeling more like a costume than ever. Arthur lingered for a moment, his car already waiting outside. The professional distance had been re-established by the fluorescent lights, but the air between us still crackled with the memory of our confession. "Well," he said, his voice a low rumble that was just for me. A bit of excitement for a Thursday. It broke up the monotony. I agreed, trying to keep my tone light, but my hands were shaking under the cover of the desk. He held my gaze, his gray eyes searching mine. There was a question in them, a clear and urgent one. What now? I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the next move had to be his. I had offered my vulnerability. He had to be the one to bridge the gap of power and circumstance that still separated us. I could not ask him out. I could not presume. It would be a catastrophic misreading of our positions. He must have understood. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, as if coming to a decision. "I have a meeting that was canceled tomorrow. A free afternoon." It was not a question, but a statement of fact, an offering of information. I simply waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I was thinking of visiting the Met," he continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "There's a new exhibit on Dutch masters. I hear the Vermeers are particularly well lit." He was referencing our first conversation in the coffee shop, weaving a thread from our past into our present. He was showing me that he remembered everything. My shift ended at 2 o'clock on Fridays. He knew this. We had discussed our schedules once, in one of our brief lobby talks. His offer was not a coincidence. It was a carefully constructed invitation, one that gave me complete agency to accept or decline. "I get off at 2, I said, the words feeling momentous. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. It transformed him, making him look years younger. "I could meet you there. Around 2:30? "Yes," I said, the word a quiet explosion in my chest. "I'd like that very much." "Good," he breathed. "Until tomorrow. Then, Leo." He turned and walked out of the lobby, but this time it didn't feel like he was leaving. It felt like he was walking toward a future that included me. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of nervous excitement. I barely slept. I chose my outfit with agonizing care, settling on my best pair of dark jeans, a simple gray sweater, and a jacket. I wanted to look like myself, not an imitation of his world. I wanted him to see Leo, not the doorman. Walking up the grand steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I felt a tremor of fear. This was real. We were meeting in public, in the daylight, on a date. There was no other word for it. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. What if this was a mistake? What if, away from the charged atmosphere of the lobby, we had nothing to say to each other? What if he saw me, in my own clothes, and the illusion was shattered? I saw him before he saw me. He was standing near the information desk, looking at a museum map. He was dressed casually, in a way I had never seen, wearing dark trousers and a beautiful, soft-looking cashmere sweater the color of oatmeal. He looked like just another patron, yet he still possessed that innate stillness, that quiet authority that drew the eye. My heart did a painful flip in my chest. He was impossibly handsome. I took a deep breath and walked toward him. "Am I late?" He looked up, and his face broke into that warm, genuine smile that I was coming to adore. "Perfect timing," he said. His eyes did a quick, appreciative sweep over my outfit, and I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. "You look good, Leo. Gray suits you too," I said, feeling clumsy. "I mean, you look good. Not in gray." "Well, you do in gray suits, but you're not wearing one." "The sweater. It's nice." I inwardly cringed at my own awkwardness. He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. "Thank you. I think you've rendered me speechless with compliments." His gentle teasing instantly put me at ease. He reached out and let his hand rest for a moment on the small of my back, a simple, proprietary gesture that sent a shockwave through me. "Shall we?" he murmured, guiding me toward the European paintings wing. Walking through the hallowed halls of the museum with him was surreal. This was my territory, the world of my abandoned studies, and yet he moved through it with the same easy confidence he did everywhere else. But he was not a passive observer. He was engaged, asking intelligent questions, listening intently as I spoke about brushstrokes and chiaroscuro. I found myself losing my nervousness, falling back into the comfortable rhythm of a subject I loved. We stood before a Vermeer, the same one I had described to him in the coffee shop. It was a small, quiet painting of a woman reading a letter by a window, the light falling on her in a soft, ethereal glow. "You were right," he said softly, standing beside me. We were close enough that our shoulders were touching. "The light is perfect. It's about the quiet moments, I think," I said, my voice hushed. "The moments that feel ordinary but are actually everything." He turned his head to look at me, his gaze intense. "Like a conversation in a coffee shop," he said. "Or waiting out a blackout," my breath caught. "Yes," I whispered. "Exactly like that." We were no longer talking about the painting. We were standing in the middle of a crowded museum, but we were utterly alone, enclosed in a bubble of our own making. He was so close. I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the subtle shift of muscle in his jaw. I had a wild, insane urge to lean in and kiss him, right there in front of the Vermeer. He must have seen the desire in my eyes, because his own gaze dropped to my lips for a fraction of a second. A muscle in his cheek ticked. He took a small, almost imperceptible step back, reestablishing a sliver of space between us. It wasn't a rejection. It was a conscious, deliberate act of respect, a recognition that this was not the time or the place. He was protecting us, protecting me. He cleared his throat softly. "Come on," he said, his voice a little rough. "I want you to show me the Caravaggios." The rest of the afternoon was a beautiful, dreamlike haze. We wandered through galleries, our conversation flowing easily from art to books to travel. I learned he had a daughter, grown and married, who lived in London. He learned about my younger sister, who was just starting college, the reason my finances were so tight. We were filling in the sketches of each other's lives, adding color and detail, turning the outlines into portraits. As the museum prepared to close, we found ourselves in the airy, light-filled atrium. We sat on a stone bench, watching the last of the visitors trickle out. A comfortable silence settled between us. "I had a wonderful time today, Leo," he said, breaking the quiet. He was looking at his hands, which were resting on his knees. "Me too," I said, and I meant it more than I had ever meant anything. He finally looked at me, and his expression was serious, the easy warmth of the afternoon replaced by a quiet intensity. "I want to be very clear," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm not looking for a casual fling, and I am acutely aware of the differences in our circumstances. The last thing I would ever want is for you to feel pressured or for this to negatively impact your life or your job." He was laying his cards on the table, just as I had in the dark. He was naming the power imbalance, the age gap, the wealth disparity. He was not ignoring them or pretending they didn't exist. He was facing them head-on, and in doing so, he was giving me all the power. "I understand that," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I don't feel pressured. I feel seen." A look of profound relief washed over his face. He reached out, his movements slow and deliberate, and took my hand. His fingers laced with mine, his palm warm and dry against my own. It was not a fleeting touch this time. It was a firm, grounding connection. He held my hand as if it were something precious. "Good," he said softly, "because I am very interested in getting to know you better, Leo. If that's something you would be interested in, as well." My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. This was it, the breaking point, the moment of truth. My fear was a distant echo, drowned out by the overwhelming surge of hope and affection I felt for this man. This good, kind, steady man who held my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. I turned my hand in his, gripping it tightly. I looked him directly in the eye. "Arthur," I said, my voice coming out stronger, more confident than I thought possible. "There is nothing I would be more interested in." The smile he gave me then was dazzling. It was pure, unshielded joy. He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a soft, warm kiss to my knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, chivalrous, and so incredibly tender it made my eyes burn. He stood up, pulling me gently to my feet. He did not let go of my hand. "Let me take you to dinner," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of intent, the beginning of something new. He took me to a small, quiet Italian restaurant in the West Village, a place with candlelit tables and white tablecloths. It was elegant, but not ostentatious. It was a place for conversation, not for being seen. He had chosen it perfectly. He let go of my hand to help me with my coat, his fingers brushing the back of my neck, and then he took it again as the host led us to a secluded corner table. He did not seem to care who saw us. His holding my hand felt like a declaration, a quiet and confident statement that we were together. Dinner was easy. The nervousness had melted away, replaced by a deep, buzzing excitement. We talked for hours, the food almost an afterthought. He told me about his late wife, who had passed away from cancer a decade ago. He spoke of her with love and respect, but without a lingering sadness that would have felt like a barrier. He told me about building his company from the ground up, about the risks and the triumphs. He was opening up his life to me, piece by piece. In turn, I told him about my art, about the charcoal sketches I still made in my small apartment, portraits of strangers I saw on the subway. I told him about my dream of one day curating a small gallery, a dream I had long ago packed away and labeled as impractical. He listened to me with that same focused intensity, making me feel as though my quiet, dusty dream was the most important thing in the world. "You should be doing that," he said simply, after I had finished. "You have the passion for it." And it's not that simple, I sighed. "It requires money I don't have, connections I can't make from behind a lectern, perhaps," he said, his gaze steady. "But a dream shouldn't be dismissed because the path isn't clear." He didn't offer to help. He didn't offer to pave the way with his money. He just offered encouragement, a statement of faith in my ability. It was exactly what I needed to hear. He respected my struggle, my independence. After dinner, he paid the bill discreetly while I was in the restroom. When I returned, he was waiting for me by the door, holding my jacket. The city air was cool and crisp as we stepped outside. The street was quiet, the brownstones dark and sleeping. He hailed a cab, a classic yellow taxi, not his private car. Another small, deliberate choice to keep us on equal footing, to keep the evening normal. He gave the driver my address, which he must have memorized from my employee file, a thought that sent a strange thrill through me. The ride was mostly silent. He kept my hand in his on the worn vinyl seat. I rested my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the city lights slide by, feeling the warmth of his thumb as he stroked the back of my hand. I felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling of rightness that settled deep in my bones. The taxi pulled up in front of my building, a nondescript walk-up that suddenly looked shabby and small. I felt a flicker of insecurity. This was my world, a stark contrast to the penthouses and town cars of his. "I live on the 4th floor," I said quietly. "There's no elevator." "That's fine," he said, his voice gentle. He paid the driver and got out with me. He walked me to the front door of the building, the lock of which was notoriously finicky. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers suddenly clumsy. He waited patiently, his hands in his pockets. When I finally got the door open, I turned to face him in the dim light of the entryway. This was the moment. The end of the night. The goodbye. I started, but I didn't know what to say. "Thank you" felt too small. "This was amazing" felt too juvenile. He stepped closer, closing the small space between us. He raised a hand and gently cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His touch was feather-light, but it rooted me to the spot. His eyes searched mine, and in their soft gray depths, I saw a reflection of my own yearning, my own fear, my own breathtaking hope. "Leo," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It was not a kiss of frantic passion or pin-up demand. It was a kiss of arrival. It was soft and slow and deeply tender. His lips were warm and firm against mine, and he tasted faintly of red wine and coffee. He held my face in his hands as if I were something precious, something fragile. It was a kiss that asked for nothing but offered everything. It was a question and an answer all at once. It was right. It was so incredibly, perfectly right. I melted into him, my hands coming up to rest on his chest. I could feel the steady, solid beat of his heart under my palm. It was the calmest, most reassuring sound in the world. All the anxiety, all the fear about our differences, it all dissolved in the simple, profound truth of this kiss. This was real. This was happening. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. We stood there for a long moment, breathing the same air, our eyes closed. The sounds of the city outside faded to a dull murmur. "I should let you go," he murmured, his breath warm against my skin. His hands slid from my face to my shoulders, his grip firm and grounding. I didn't want him to go. I wanted to invite him up to my tiny, sparse apartment. I wanted to fall asleep next to him and wake up with him in the morning. But I knew it was too soon. We were building something, and a good foundation had to be laid carefully, brick by brick. This perfect, unhurried first kiss was the cornerstone. "Okay," I whispered, my voice shaky. He straightened up, but he didn't let go of my shoulders. He looked at me, a long, searching look. "Get some sleep, Leo," he said softly. He gave my shoulders a gentle squeeze, then released me. He stepped back, putting a deliberate foot of space between us. He gave me a small, sad smile, turned, and walked down the steps to the waiting cab he must have asked to stay. I watched until it turned the corner, its taillights vanishing into the night. I climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my apartment in a daze. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, leaning back against it, my fingers tracing my lips. They still tingled from his kiss. The entire evening felt like a dream, but the memory of his touch, the taste of his lips, was vividly, electrifyingly real. In my small, quiet room, with the cufflink sitting in its bowl on my dresser, everything had changed. The world had shifted on its axis, and I had shifted with it. I was no longer just the doorman at the Argent, the quiet observer of other people's lives. I was Leo, and I had just been kissed by Arthur Vance. And it was only the beginning. I awoke the next morning to the pale light of a Saturday, filtering through my thin curtains. For a moment, I lay in bed, disoriented, the familiar quiet of my room feeling somehow different. Then the memory of the previous night washed over me, the museum, the dinner, the kiss. A slow, incredulous smile spread across my face. It hadn't been a dream. But as the full reality of the morning set in, a familiar tendril of anxiety began to creep in. In the soft glow of a candlelit restaurant, our differences had seemed romantic. In the harsh light of day, they felt like insurmountable obstacles. I looked around my small apartment. The secondhand furniture, the stack of bills on my desk, the threadbare rug. This was my life. His was a world of penthouses, private cars, and $1,000 suits. The kiss had been perfect, but what came after the kiss? My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it with a sense of dread, half expecting a text message that was polite, formal, and distant, a gentle letdown. Instead, it was a simple message from an unknown number. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." And my heart did a little flip. He had sent a message. He was thinking of me. The "it" was so perfectly him. Understated, elegant, private. I saved his number immediately, my fingers trembling slightly. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on something simple. "Morning. I did, thank you. I had a really wonderful time last night." His reply came almost instantly. "As did I. So wonderful, in fact, that I find myself reluctant to wait until Tuesday to see you again. Would you be free for breakfast tomorrow?" The directness of it, the clear statement of his desire to see me again so soon, chased away the last of my morning after anxieties. He wasn't pulling away. He was leaning in. We met for breakfast at a bright, cheerful diner he knew, the kind of place with vinyl booths and thick, ceramic coffee mugs. It was another deliberate choice, a world away from the fancy restaurant. He was showing me he could exist in my world just as easily as I could in his. He was wearing jeans and a simple, dark blue polo shirt. He looked relaxed, happy, and impossibly handsome. Over pancakes and coffee, we talked. But this conversation was different. It was more practical, more focused on the what now. He brought it up, of course, with his usual gentle candor. "I want to do this right, Leo," he said, putting down his fork and giving me his full attention. "I meant what I said last night. I am very serious about getting to know you. But we need to be smart about it." He addressed the elephant in the room directly. "Your job," he said, his expression serious. "The last thing I want is to jeopardize it. The Argent has strict policies about staff fraternizing with residents or their guests. While I'm technically a guest, the perception could still be problematic for you. I had been worrying about this exact thing all morning. The fact that he was the one to bring it up, that his primary concern was for my well-being and my livelihood, filled me with a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. So, he continued, leaning forward slightly, I have a proposal. At the building, we remain as we were. Polite, professional. Mr. Vance and Leo. No lingering touches, no private smiles. We give no one any reason to gossip. I nodded, a little disappointed but understanding the necessity of it. But outside of those walls, he said, a spark lighting in his eyes, we are Arthur and Leo. And we can see each other as much as we both would like. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His touch was warm and reassuring. Does that seem fair to you? More than fair, I said, my voice thick with emotion. He wasn't just protecting my job. He was creating a clear boundary that respected my professional life. He was building a space for us, a private world where we could be ourselves, away from the prying eyes and unspoken rules of the Argent. That breakfast set the tone for the weeks that followed. We built our relationship in the stolen hours between my shifts and his meetings. We explored the city together. He took me to small, independent movie theaters and obscure bookstores. I took him to my favorite little park in my neighborhood and a tiny, hole-in-the-wall noodle shop with the best broth in the city. He never once made me feel like my world was less than his. He entered it with genuine curiosity and respect. At work, we adhered to our agreement. It was a strange, secret play we were performing. He would arrive, nod politely, and say, "Good evening, Leo." I would reply, "Good evening, Mr. Vance." But now, there was a silent current running beneath the surface. I could feel the warmth in his gaze, even from across the lobby. And I knew that later that night, or the next day, I would get a text, or we would meet for a quiet dinner, and he would be Arthur again. The duality was thrilling, a secret that bound us even closer together. One afternoon, a test of our new arrangement arrived in the form of Mr. Calloway, the same resident Arthur had so expertly shut down weeks before. I was standing at my post when Calloway came through the door, followed by Arthur, who must have been in the same elevator. Calloway, who seemed to hold a grudge, gave me a sneering look. Still holding the door open, "I see," he said, his voice loud enough for Arthur to hear. Must be a fulfilling career. I felt a hot flush of anger and shame. Before, I would have just swallowed the insult, my face a mask of professional indifference. But now, it felt different. The insult wasn't just directed at me, but at the man Arthur was choosing to be with. Before I could even formulate a response, Arthur spoke, his voice cool and clipped. His career, Mr. Calloway, seems to be built on reliability and discretion. Qualities you might do well to learn. He didn't even look at Calloway as he said it. He was looking directly at me, and in his eyes, I saw a fierce, protective loyalty. He then continued walking, but the message was clear. We were a united front, even here. Calloway sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red, and scurried away. I stood there, stunned and grateful. Later that night, my phone buzzed. "I hope he didn't upset you. Some people mistake wealth for worth." I smiled as I typed my reply. "I'm fine. My boyfriend has my back." It was the first time I had used that word. Boyfriend. It felt bold, but right. His response was immediate. "I like the sound of that. I always will." Our relationship deepened, settling into a comfortable, easy intimacy. He gave me a key to his apartment, a stunning, minimalist space with panoramic views of the city. He gave it to me not as an invitation to move in, but, as he explained it, so you never have to be announced at the front desk of my building. So you can come and go as you please. This is your space, too. It was another gesture that centered my autonomy, my freedom. The first time I used the key, I let myself into his silent apartment while he was still at work. I walked through the quiet rooms, touching the spines of his books, running my hand over the cool marble of his kitchen counter. It wasn't intimidating anymore. It was just Arthur's home. I made a pot of coffee and sat on his comfortable sofa, looking out at the sprawling city below. When he came home an hour later and found me there, the smile on his face was one of pure, unadulterated joy. It was the look of a man coming home. We fell into a domestic rhythm. We cooked dinner together in his state-of-the-art kitchen, my chopping skills clumsy next to his practiced ease. We watched old black-and-white movies, curled up on his sofa, my feet in his lap. These quiet, ordinary moments were the ones I cherished most. They were the moments I had only ever read about in books or seen in paintings, the quiet moments that feel ordinary but are actually everything. One Saturday morning, I was sketching in a notebook, sitting at his large dining room table while he read the paper. He came to stand behind me, resting his hands on my shoulders, and looked down at my drawing. It was a portrait of him, a quick charcoal study I had done from memory, capturing the thoughtful expression he wore when he was reading. "That's really good, Leo," he said, his voice filled with genuine surprise and admiration. I felt myself blush. "It's just a sketch." "No," he said, his hands tightening slightly on my shoulders. "It's more than that. You have a gift." He was quiet for a long moment. "What if," he began, his voice hesitant, "what if you took a class? Or started applying for gallery assistant positions? I could help. Not with money," he added quickly, as if sensing my immediate defensiveness. "But I know some people. I could make some introductions. The rest would be up to you." I turned to look up at him. His expression was open, honest. He was offering me a key, not to his apartment this time, but to a door I had long considered sealed shut. He was using his resources, his connections, not to buy my affection or create a dependency, but to open a path for my own talent. It was an act of profound belief in me. Tears pricked my eyes. "Arthur." He knelt down, so we were at eye level. He gently wiped a stray tear from my cheek with his thumb. "Just think about it," he said softly. "You deserve to have your dream. I just want to be the man standing beside you when you achieve it." In that moment, all my remaining fears about our differences, about the gap between our worlds, finally and completely evaporated. The money, the age, the status, they were just context. They were the setting, not the story. The story was about two people, one who had been living in the shadows, and one who had gently, patiently, and respectfully shown him the light. The story was about a steady, kind man who had looked past a uniform and seen a person worthy of love. I leaned forward and kissed him, a kiss filled with all the gratitude and love that was overflowing in my heart. He was my safe harbor, my steady anchor. He was the man who had left his father's umbrella in my care, and in returning it, I had found my home. I did think about it. For weeks, I wrestled with his offer, my pride warring with my desire. But looking at Arthur, seeing the unwavering faith in his eyes, I realized that accepting his help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an act of trust. It was allowing myself to be a partner to him, just as he was to me. We were building a life together, and that meant allowing ourselves to lean on each other's strengths. I started taking a night class in gallery management. Arthur never asked about it unless I brought it up, never made me feel like it was a project he was overseeing. He was just supportive. He would have dinner waiting for me when I got home late from class, and he would listen for hours as I excitedly told him about what I was learning. My world, which had once felt so small and circumscribed, was beginning to expand, to fill with color and possibility. My last day at the Argent was quiet and bittersweet. I had given my 2 weeks' notice after being offered a part-time internship at a small but respected gallery in Chelsea, an introduction Arthur had made, an interview I had nailed on my own. I turned in my uniform, the heavy wool jacket and the slightly too small hat, and it felt like shedding a skin. I was no longer Leo the doorman. I was just Leo. As I was leaving, I saw the familiar black car pull up. Arthur got out. It was a Tuesday evening, just before 7. He was right on schedule. He walked into the lobby, looking magnificent in one of his charcoal suits. He saw me standing there in my own clothes, holding a small box with my few personal belongings from the staff room. He walked right up to me, ignoring the curious glances from my replacement, a young man who looked just as nervous as I had been 3 years ago. "Ready to go?" Arthur asked, his voice low and warm. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. This lobby had been my cage, my sanctuary, my stage. It was where I had first seen him, where I had watched and yearned, where our story had begun. He took the box from my hands. "Let me get that," he said. He looked around the gleaming, impersonal space one last time, then his eyes met mine. They were full of love and pride. "You'll never have to stand behind that desk again," he said softly. He placed a hand on the small of my back and guided me toward the revolving door. We stepped out into the cool evening air of the city, leaving the world of the Argent behind us for good. We were walking away from the place of our beginning, but we were walking toward everything else. The future was uncertain. The internship was unpaid. My path was no longer steady or predictable. But for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid. I had a foundation under me, a quiet, solid base built of trust, respect, and mutual care. I looked at the man walking beside me, carrying my small box of belongings as if it were a treasure. The silver at his temples shone in the streetlight, and his profile was strong and kind. He caught me looking and smiled, that slow, wonderful smile that still made my heart ache. He shifted the box to one arm and laced his fingers through mine. His hand was warm and strong, a familiar, comforting weight. We walked down the street, two men holding hands, leaving the past behind and stepping into a future we would build together. The differences in our ages and our bank accounts were still facts, but they no longer felt like a chasm. They were just part of the landscape of our lives, details in the larger, more beautiful picture we were creating. I was no longer watching life from behind glass. I was in it, living it with him, and it felt like coming home. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.